Turn your Bibles to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. We are down around verse 12 or so. We've been going through this section, which is getting the Christianity down to the nitty-gritty. This is our day-to-day stuff. It's how all of this salvation business affects our daily lives. It's one thing to know what God did and His conditions for salvation. It's another thing then to put it into practice. And from chapter 12 on, we're talking about putting our Christianity into practice. We've looked at already in verses 9 and 10 and 11, we've looked at our relationship to love is to be without hypocrisy. We've looked at our relationship to morality, abhor what's evil, cling to what's good. We've looked at our relationship to our brethren in verse 10, being kindly affectionate to one another. Our relationship to work in verse 11, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. So that's our relationship to work. And starting in verse 12, our relationship to tribulation. All three of those exhortations have to do with tribulation. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. You can see how those things are connected. The middle thing there, the tribulation, is the thing that ties them together. In tribulation, we're going through a rough time. Could come from a lot of reasons. It could be a financial problem. It could be a health problem. It could be conflict in the family or conflict with a friend. But there's tribulation. Everybody goes through tribulation. And that's an important lesson for Christians to learn, that everybody, including Christians, go through tribulation. Sometimes people get the idea, especially those who may be young in the faith, they get the idea that, well, I'm a Christian now, everything in my life should be hunky-dory, I should never have any problems. And that's not true. You fall into the trap that Job fell into in his life. You know, if you think you're never going to have any hard times, then you come out lashing out at God. Why are you doing this to me? Well, everybody suffers tribulation. What's one reason, just as a curiosity here, what's one reason we suffer tribulation? I'm not talking about what I said earlier, financial and all that. I'm talking about why is it that we have to go through tribulation in this life?
Strengthen our faith.
I heard two things. You first, then you.
Strengthen our faith and give us patience.
Yeah, to strengthen our faith. Is that what you said? Yeah, God allows these things to come upon us because He uses them. We forget that God's in control of everything. He knows what's going on. He can see the end from the beginning. And He allows these things to come upon us because they can shape our character. They can make us better. I've said many times that tribulation can make you better or bitter. It's up to you. Are you going to let that train you to be a better person, or are you going to be bitter and lash out at God? It can make us better in the sense that it teaches us compassion for others who also go through tribulation. It teaches us endurance, which is what this verse is talking about. It teaches us to endure, to be tough, to be strong. And so there's a value to it. There's a value to suffering. That's why James says, count it all joy when you fall into manifold trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And that's exactly what he says right here, patient in tribulation. And the word patient there means enduring, being tough, sticking it out, seeing it through. And right before that, rejoicing in hope. Think about that. One of the things that can get us through tribulation is the hope of a better day. That it isn't always going to be bad like it is today. It's going to get better. Things are going to change. Things are going to turn around. If not here, then certainly hereafter when we get to heaven to be with God. Sometimes they turn around here, sometimes they don't. But whether they turn around here or not, they will turn around someday for the Christian. Things will get better. So go ahead. Did you start to say something?
It'll help you to be humble.
Yes, it can help you to be humble. It can humble you down. Paul even talked about that. He said, because of the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, lest I should be exalted above measure. There. So you can get the big head if you're not careful, and God can use these things to bring us down a notch or two and keep us humble before God. So rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. That's one of your best tools in tribulation is prayer. And tribulation should force us to our knees before God. That should be the first thing we think about. This happened to me, and I don't know why it happened, but the first thing I'm going to do is take it to God. And sometimes you'll find that taking it to God won't change a thing. You get done, you pray to God 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, and you pray to God about this, and you're done praying, but nothing's changed, but you feel a whale of a lot better for some strange reason. You ever notice that? Because you've turned it over to someone more powerful to you. Help me with this, Lord. Help me get through this. And so continuing steadfastly in prayer, don't forget that. That's a very important tool in tribulation. In verse 13, a relationship to the needy. Distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. Those two things are related. The needs of the saints in particular here, we know that it's not saints only in this passage because he's talking about individual obligations. And Galatians 6:10 says, do good unto all men, especially to those who are the house of faith. So it's not just limited to the saints, but certainly we need to have them in our minds first and foremost. They're our brothers and sisters in Christ. They're our family, spiritually speaking. So we see a need, we should try and fill that need. And then given to hospitality. Hospitality is one of, you've heard me say faith is the most misunderstood word in the Bible. Here's another one that's misunderstood, hospitality. The English word usually makes us think of having our friends over. And again, don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with having your friends over. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the Bible, the word hospitality is not talking about that at all. The word hospitality literally means love of strangers. Let that sink in for a minute. Strangers. People you don't know. So hospitality is almost, in the Bible, it's almost a benevolent thing. That's why I said these two things are linked. Distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. Hospitality is almost a benevolent thing. You're looking out for the needs of others and people who may be strange to you, who you may not know very well. I always was impressed with the congregation at Fishers, where I came from. There was always brethren there who were on the lookout for visitors. We had visitors every single week. In fact, we had visitors every single assembly. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We always had visitors. Part of that's because of where we're at in the area. But we always had members who were on the lookout for those visitors, and they would invariably invite them. Come home with us, or come out to the Dairy Queen with us after services, or let's go out and eat dinner today after church services. And they were always doing that, and that's hospitality. And it was that kind of thing that brought people back, believe it or not. It was that extra step of reaching out to the visitors and showing them a little extra kindness that would bring them back. And when we would ask them, they would decide to place membership. Well, why? And one of the things they would always say is the friendliness of the members. Brought them back again and again. So hospitality, looking for opportunities. And a clear, easy application of this is seen, for example, if you have a gospel meeting and the visiting preacher. And I've seen churches where they'll put a meal list, and it never gets signed. I've seen, and you're into the meeting and there's still 3 or 4 days open. And that should not be. Christians step up, take responsibility, show that preacher a little hospitality. It doesn't mean you have to have him into your home. Take him out. If you think, well, my house is too messy or whatever, take him out somewhere. Or bring something to him. But show a little hospitality. And a lot of times in a meeting, sometimes we know the guy, but sometimes we don't. He's a whole new preacher we've never had before. So show a little hospitality. Questions, comments up to this point? Yes, go ahead.
It's like if somebody new comes in this building.
Yeah.
And if we do not show them hospitality or say, hey, we're glad you came, and we just sit in our seats and never go up and speak. You can speak to family anytime.
Yeah.
When somebody new comes in, you go and say, hey, we're glad you come.
Couldn't agree more.
And when they come in, the first thing they're going to say is, when they walk out, that's your only chance of hoping they'll come back. But if they do not see friendship or whatever, they will not be back. They'll say they're not friendly.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I couldn't
Out
agree
of your
more.
way. You don't just look at them and say, you speak to them and say, hey, we're glad you came.
I have, and we've all done this. Every congregation has its own little personality. But I've been to congregations where they will go out of their way to talk to you. And then I've been to others where as soon as you walk in the door, everybody just kind of turns around and looks at you like, what in the world are you doing here? And you get that cold shoulder. And then they look away just as quick as they looked at you, then they look away. And you've just sent a message.
The church will never grow if you're not friendly.
I agree. And you've just sent a message when you do that. when you turn away and you don't say anything and you don't stretch out a hand of greeting or anything like that, there's probably a 90% chance they won't be back. And they'll say, not friendly. Yes, sir.
Well, the church that we visit when we're deer hunting in Illinois, in Albany, has what you're talking about. For the most part, everybody just looks at you.
Yeah.
But because we've been going there for 15, 20 years, once you, like you said, every church has its own personality. It's not that they're not friendly, they're just different than we are in the South, because that's in the North. Well, they are friendly, very friendly, and if you do get to talk to one of them, you can't get away from them because they want to talk. But it's not because they're not friendly, it's just, I don't know if it's location or personality, or I don't know, but if you just go once, you're going to get that
cold shoulder.
Yeah, but it's not
But-
that's a misconception.
Well, it may be a misconception, and I see what you're saying for sure, but I think that we should overcome that and reach out. We should try and do better. We should reach out, because first impressions sometimes say a lot to people, even though it may be an inaccurate first impression, as you're suggesting, and I think that's true. It may not be accurate, but it also is the first impression they get, and sometimes it'll turn them away. Won't always do it, but on our part, if we see a way to improve and do better, we should, I think. But I think your point is well taken, though.
Our only shot.
It may be our only
Make an
shot.
impression on them, so we need to try to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only reason we learned that is because that we just kept
Over
kept
time.
going over time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
see, when we go to West Tennessee, they're friendly, you can't hardly get out of the church house.
Yeah.
When they just keep talking to you in West Tennessee. So that's the difference in, I guess, the South and the North.
Yeah, sometimes it's regional, sometimes it's I don't know, but there's different reasons for it. But sometimes it is regional, difference in the South and the North. There is a difference there for sure. Moving on here to verse, where did I leave off? 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. So now we have something about our relationship to persecutors. Now, our form of persecution today is not like it was in those days. In those days, you're liable to wind up in jail or dead or beaten badly. That was the kind of persecution they received just for being a Christian, just for being different in that way. But our form of persecution, it still exists, but it's different. It comes in the form of ridicule or scorn or things like that. And that's usually the kind of persecution we'll face, at least in this country. Now, there are other places where they will still face the threat of death. I'm talking about here for us. But the point I'm really trying to get at is persecution still is present. It just has changed its form. And he says, bless those, bless and do not curse. And the ideal there is you don't play tit for tat. You persecuted me, I'm going to persecute you. You took a swipe at me, I'm going to take a swipe at you. No, he says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Do not retaliate. Do not return the same in kind. Now, this is where the Christian has to overcome the tendency of the flesh. The fleshly tendency is, you sock me in the nose, I'm going to sock you back. Okay, that's the human fleshly tendency. But the Christian tendency is to try and overcome that and do better. Later on in the text, he'll talk a little bit more about that, about giving cold water to your enemy and stuff like that. And so we overcome the tendency of the flesh, and we try to do better and win people over that way. The old expression, kill them with kindness, comes to mind when you think about that. So bless those who persecute you. That almost comes verbatim from the Sermon on the Mount, by the way. Jesus said words very similar to that in Matthew 5. Verse 15, in relationship to our sympathies. And I said earlier something about tribulation. And one of the things tribulation teaches us is to be sympathetic. I've lost people in my life, and so I know what somebody else feels like when they've lost someone in their life, see? And so you have that sympathy. But if you never had any hard times come to you, you'd never learn to develop that sensitivity to other people's hurts. So rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And that's on both sides of the thing. When somebody has a success, you don't need to respond with jealousy or snide remarks. Sometimes people are jealous of others. Well, you got a bigger promotion than I did, or you got a bigger raise than I did, or you got a nicer house than I did. And so people, instead of rejoicing over that, they get jealous and bitter. And so he says, no, someone has successes, rejoice with them. Be happy for them. And when they're sad, learn to show sympathy for them. The word sympathy literally means to feel with. And so learn to feel with those people. So we learn as we go through life that whether they're Christians or not, people have feelings. People are human beings and they have feelings, so we need to learn to rejoice and weep with them. Verse 16, in relationship to pride, be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. And notice he says, do not be wise in your own opinion. You may be wise, but you don't have to get a big head about it. You know, there are people who are wiser than others, but you don't have to get a big head about it. Don't be wise in your own opinion, puffed up. We're all human beings. We're all just common folk. You know, sometimes people get this idea that, well, you know, I got a little bit more money than you, so I'm better than you. Sorry, that's not true. We need to come down off our high horse when we get to thinking that way. Or I know a little bit more about this subject than you do, and so I'm better than you. Well, it doesn't work that way. So it's all about being humble around others and before others, and understanding that we're all humans, we're all in the same boat, we're all in the same family, and, you know, different people can have different talents, and some people can excel here and others will excel there, and all of that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and we don't need to be upset about it or high-minded about it. We need to be humble in all of this. Verse 17, and here where he kind of returns to that, I said he mentioned this later about getting back at people. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. So again, that's a human trait. It's fleshly. It's the flesh. You hit me, I'm going to hit you. You insult me, I'm going to insult you. And so it's like this game. And what happens with that is it always escalates. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it never ends. And so somebody's got to be the better person here and try to end it. So don't repay evil for evil. What should we repay instead? Kindness and goodness and blessing, that's right. I remember, he may have told you this too, Gary Sandusky. He talked about this, I think it was a neighbor lady that he had. It may have been him or maybe somebody he knew, but there was a neighbor lady. She was mean and ornery and didn't want to get along with anybody, but he decided he's going to help her out. And he started mowing her grass. She didn't even ask him to, just start mowing her grass. And if he saw something need to be done over at her house, he'd go over there and do it. And over time, he wore her down. And she started talking to him and started being friendly to him. And he came up with this expression, kill him with kindness. And this is the better approach. This is the Christian approach. Rather than, you know, you get entrenched over here and they get entrenched over there and you just hurl insults back and forth or whatever. You try to do good to that person and win them over that way, showing them that you don't really have fangs and you're not as bad as they may have thought you were, and so you start doing good. That's what Christians do. That's how we win people over. We win them over friendship-wise, and we can ultimately win them over to Christ that way as well, by being good to other people. So don't repay evil for evil. Have regard for good things, if it's possible. Notice that. If it's possible, that implies it's not always possible. There are some people who don't want peace. There are ornery, stubborn people in this world who don't want peace. And you can try and you can bend over backwards and you can do everything and it's not going to work because there's just a certain element of people that's not going to work for. But he says, if it's possible, as much as depends on you. In other words, don't you be the problem. He might be the problem, she might be the problem, but don't you be the problem. As much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Okay? Sometimes, unfortunately, being able to live peaceably with someone means staying away from them. Because if they don't want peace, and every time you get around them, they're wanting to fuss and growl and fume and have a war, then sometimes the best way to be at peace with them is just stay away from them. And sometimes this can get into families, you know. This can get into a family. And there are toxic people in families. And just being around them is you just know There's certain people in the families like, I just dread even being around that person. Well, then limit your time being around them. If you can't win them over with kindness and goodness, and they don't want to have peace, then maybe the best way to have peace is just stay away from them. Sometimes that'll work out a whole lot better for you. But whatever, he says, if it's possible, as much as, don't you be the problem, okay? Live peaceably with all men. And by the way, verse 17 on down, all of this is a single paragraph. It all goes together here. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. When he says give place to wrath, then whose wrath is he talking about? Yeah, let God handle this.
But the New American Standard puts it that way, the wrath.
The wrath of God.
The wrath of God.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he's talking about. As you can see when he quotes that, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So it is the wrath of God he's talking about. You don't have to take out your wrath on them. Let God handle it. He'll take care of it, and he'll do it right. He'll do it exactly the way it should be done in exactly the right measure. Now, let me just pause here, give place to wrath, and skip ahead for just a second to chapter 13, verse 4. Speaking of the civil government here. He is God's minister to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. He is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices. Look at that context right there. Just 3 or 4 or 5 verses later, he talks about one of the ways in which God inflicts his wrath. Now, this is certainly not the only way that God can inflict his wrath, but one of the ways in which God inflicts his wrath is through the civil punishment. So, what was it they used to say on the people's court? Don't take the law into your own hands, take them to court. Let the law handle it, in other words, is the idea. Let the law handle it. Let God handle it. Don't you try to handle it, is the idea. So don't get revenge, going back to 12:19. Don't get revenge. Revenge is anti-Christian. It's not the way a Christian lives. You don't revenge yourself. But you give place, you let God handle it in his own way. It may be through the civil government, it may be through some other means, but God will take care of it. He knows what's going on, and he knows what you're going through, and he'll take care of it in his own good time. Leave it to him. Turn it over to him. Therefore, verse 20, to make this real, to make this practical, if your enemy is hungry, let him starve. I know what it says, is it? If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. Kill him with kindness. See that? Be good instead of being bad. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't repay in kind. Don't get revenge. But do good. Keep on doing good no matter what. You be the bigger person. You be the better person. You be the Christian, okay, in this. Even if the other person is a Christian, you be the Christian. You be the better Christian, okay? So if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. In so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Explain to me those coals of fire. He's obviously not speaking literal. You're not going to dump hot fire coals on somebody's head, especially if you're feeding him and giving him a drink. So by feeding him, by giving him a drink, you heap coals of fire. Explain that to me. How do you do that?
Soften up his conscience.
There you go. The coals of fire are figurative. You're softening him up. You're going to make him feel guilty. I can't believe I was so mean to that guy. He's been so good to me. He's been so nice to me. And that's the idea. You're going to wear him down. And in that sense, you heap coals of fire. These coals of fire are coals of guilt, is what they are. You're going to make him feel guilty. You're going to make him turn around. You're going to make him or her change their conduct by your conduct, by not returning evil for evil, by not avenging yourself, by not playing back and forth, tit for tat, and doing the right thing. You'll heap coals of fire on his head.
Fit into verse 18.
Verse 18. Yeah, if it is possible. Don't forget the part about if it's possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but that still won't give you the right to lash back. If it's not possible, then the best thing you can do, as I said earlier, is just stay away from them. If they don't want peace and you can't have peace with them, then the best thing you can do probably is just stay away from them.
Know that from the example of Jesus that people are that way, because I mean,
Yeah.
who could have done anything any more better than Jesus did. I
Yeah.
mean, he was perfect,
Yeah, there,
but they still hated him enough to kill him.
yeah, this kill 'em with kindness thing won't work on everybody. There are going to be those people that it's not going to work on. They're just going to be mean and ornery anyway. The Lord will take care of it. You don't have to get back at them. The Lord will take care of it. And perhaps the best thing to do in that case is just stay away from them. And then you don't have the problem. So don't be overcome by evil, verse 21, but overcome evil with good. So there's your weapon. Use good, do good, be good, and you will overcome evil. And again, if not in this life, then in the next. Because you'll get your heavenly reward and he'll get his punishment for being evil. So it's all going to work out in the end. The interesting thing about free will, if you talk to a Calvinist, they argue against free will because they say if man has free will, then God's not really in control. If you can say no to God, then God's not really in control. But here's where the control is exerted, at the judgment. See, God is finally asserting, he's given you free will so you can choose, but you're going to be responsible for your choices, and his sovereignty is vindicated in the end. In the end, he sets everything right. The wicked will be punished, and the righteous will be rewarded, and everything will be set right. Right now, everything seems like it's in chaos precisely because of free will. But don't think for a second God isn't in control. And he will exert that control ultimately and finally in that final judgment when everything is set right. All the wrongs are righted and punished, and the righteous are rewarded.
Sin is death.
The wages of sin is death, and that's not going to change. It's always been that way, and it always will be. That's right. Any questions on chapter 12?
Back in the Old Testament, it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. They could do whatever, back then.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point, except I will say this, and this is one of the things that Jesus corrected in the Sermon on the Mount. The eye for an eye and tooth for tooth was actually a measure of civil punishment. So if you were a judge sitting over a case and a guy kicked somebody in the shin, for lack of a better illustration, socked him in the nose, kicked him in the shin, the judicial punishment was he gets kicked in the shin. You don't go back and cut his head off because he kicked you in the shin. And it was designed to temper the civil government, is what it was, so that they don't come back and overly punish. The punishment must match the crime. That was the original intent of eye for an eye. The Jews had taken it and corrupted that into, I can do whatever I want. You hit me, I hit you back. That was not what that meant in the Old Testament. They were misusing that. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus corrects that misinterpretation. So people thought, to your point, people thought they could do whatever they wanted to. You hit me, I hit you, because eye for an eye. That's not what that meant. That was designed to govern the civil authorities so they didn't overpunish you. Do you got that passage in the Old Testament? I'd see if I illustrate that just to prove it to you. We could probably find it.
One place about if a man, if you're in a fight and you hit a woman in the stomach.
Yeah. Exodus 22, I think. Yeah, you reminded me of that when you said that. Thank you, that's it. 21, I said 22, it's 21. Starting with verse 22. And this will illustrate what I mean about the eye for an eye. If men fight and hurt a woman with child, so these two guys go at it, they're in a fight, and in the fight they end up knocking a woman down, a pregnant woman down, okay? And it causes her to go into labor. So she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows. No harm either to the woman or to the baby, by the way. Okay? No harm follows. He shall surely be punished. Okay? He doesn't get by with that scot-free. According as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Notice that. As the judges determine. This is a civil matter. If any harm follows to the woman or to the baby, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. The punishment must match the crime. So if the baby is fine, then there's no punishment. If the baby's injured, then you don't kill the man, but you injure him. Eye for an eye, for example, tooth for tooth. But if the baby dies, he dies. See, eye for an eye, life for life. So the punishment must match the crime. That's what that really meant, eye for an eye. And the Jews had corrupted that to mean, you hit me, I hit you. And that's not what that was. It was designed to govern the judges. It was designed to govern the civil power. And Jesus clarified that in the Sermon on the Mount. Anything else? Okay, chapter 13. Our duty, the first 7 verses, our duty to the civil government. A lot of misunderstanding about this. I've come across people who think, well, if I don't agree with the government, I don't have to obey with the government. Sorry, that's not what the Bible says. If I don't agree with them, I don't have to do what they tell me. That's not what the Bible says. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. The only exception, we don't have time to deal with all this, but we can kind of set it at the table here. The only exception to disobeying the civil government is that the government is actually trying to get you to do something wrong. For example, the government said you must abort your children after the third one. You can have 2, and starting with the third one, you must, they do that in China, by the way. You must abort your children. Well, that's murder, and the government has no right to tell you to sin, okay? And that's when you obey God rather than men. But you don't have the right to come along and say, well, I don't like that law, and therefore I don't have to obey it. Sorry, that's not the way it works. Keep in mind that when Paul wrote these words, who was in charge? Nero. Romans. Nero was a pervert. Nero was a homosexual. Nero was an evil man. But Paul says, obey. Doesn't make any difference how bad the guy is, whether you like him or not. That has nothing to do with it. You obey. Unless he's trying to get you to do something sinful. Now catch that. If he's trying to get you to do something sinful, like you must abort your children.
Don't you think, though, when they're trying to make all these laws that are wrong and sinful, that we need to do something in order to do right?
I think that there are ways that you can, especially in this country where you can protest, you can vote, you can pray, but you can't flagrantly disobey unless they're trying to get you to actually do something sinful. You cannot flagrantly disobey. You have to obey them. For example, abortion is horrible. It's legal. So the solution for us is not to go bomb an abortion clinic. That's just as bad. That's murder. That's destruction of property. That's wrong, period. You cannot justify that. But you can stand in front of that abortion clinic and protest. And you can express your views, and you can vote, and you can pray. There are things that you can do as long as it's within the confines of the law, is what I'm saying. Yeah. But yeah, there are a lot of laws that we disagree with, without a doubt. A lot of laws I disagree with, and I'm sure most of you as well disagree with. But as long as they're not forcing us to do evil, we have to kind of go along and comply in the sense of doing whatever they tell us to do, as long as they're not telling us to do something sinful. If it's a law we disagree with, and especially in this country, the way it's set up, we can voice our views, we can protest, we can vote, we can do a lot of things in that regard. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. Making your views known. Yes, sir.
More and more in this country, if you're protesting on the side that wants to promote the evil, that's fine. But if you're protesting on the other side, that's starting to be a problem.
Yeah, it is starting to be a problem. That's a predicament that we're going to already find ourselves in. It's just getting worse. But yeah, it's getting to the point now where it's very one-sided in the justice that's executed. That still doesn't give us the right to disobey, okay? But it's obvious that the justice is not there. When you have one viewpoint that's silenced and squelched and punished and persecuted, and the other viewpoint they get to do and say whatever they want to do. That's not fair, but that doesn't give us the right still to do evil in repayment. But yes, it is noted that there is clearly 2 unequal systems of justice here that are developing rapidly.
Like it looks so that it was not Christian to protest. I just don't like that.
Well, it may be, and if that's your conviction, then you should. But I think that and this is the reason I say this, is because of the law. And just, well, this is the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, nor the right of the people, here it comes, the right of the people to assemble peaceably and petition the government. That's protest. That's written into our law. But notice, peacefully, not burning down cities and destroying businesses. That's not peaceful. That's not lawful. That's not Christian, to your point. That's not Christian. That kind of protest. But standing there with a sign is a different matter. Standing there with a sign and expressing your view, I don't think is illegal or unchristian in my perspective. Now, if you felt like that's unchristian, then you definitely should not do that. I don't go around doing that. As a preacher, think about this for a second, and maybe think about this as a Christian as well. But as a preacher, I tend to keep my political views a little bit muted, because once you start taking a stand openly, think about this, you're trying to reach the lost. You may have isolated yourself from half of your audience. Think about that. Don't you want to reach that Democrat too? Don't you want to reach that guy in the other party too? And so sometimes if you're too out there with your political views, you can isolate half your audience. And the whole point of being a Christian is to reach out and save other people. And if you've already turned them off because you got to vote for so-and-so sign in your yard, you're hindering your own case. You're hindering your own cause. Something to think about. Just something to think about. I'm not saying it has to be this or has to be that. I'm not saying you can't put a sign in your yard. I'm saying I don't. And that's why. Because I've isolated myself from half my audience if I do that. Yes.
No, I just,
What was the man behind you? I'm sorry.
I think we need to try to reach everybody. I agree with that. We're supposed to. We're commanded to. But nowadays, my personal opinion on Democratic liberals, they're not going to listen to a lot of them. Yeah. I mean, and the ones that claim to be Christian or liberal, they're lying to themselves. Just because of stuff they believe in or stuff that they go along with.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Republicans, conservatives too. You know, you go the other side of the aisle too.
Yeah.
But it's got to be ridiculous.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous. And, you think about, there's no way in the world, and this is about as political as I'm going to get here, there's no way in the world I'm going to vote for a party that can't even tell you what a woman is. I'm just not, period. I'm just not going to do that. They can't tell you what a woman is, and you got a whole political party now that says, I don't know what a woman is. I'm not a biologist. I don't know what a woman is. That's nuts. I'm not going to vote for somebody that does that. I'm just not. Yes, sir.
Kind of follow up on the protest. We are to obey the laws of the land.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody commits murder and it goes to the court system, and they're, just say the state says, all right, you're going to be put to death. Well, they said, we've all seen on TV where you got some church groups. I mean, when I say church, I'm saying denomination groups.
Yeah.
Goes down and wants to protest. Well, they're in the wrong because they're not, if you would read the Bible, you're supposed to go, like you said, follow the laws of the land, and they're over here opposing what's been said.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what's going to happen. If you kill somebody, you're going to prison, who knows how long anymore, or you're going to be sentenced to death.
Yeah.
They should not be out there trying to protest, say, hey, no, don't do that.
Yeah, and to your point, too, not all protests are equally valid. Not all protests are good. There are people who protest good things. Well, I'm protesting, I want to kill babies, That's not good. That's not good. So, but my point here in all this is, let's not forget who we are. We're Christians. So either case, whatever comes up, we always have to act like Christians. That's our job, is to be Christians in the whole thing. Yes?
In some cases, in some places, Jesus also believed in something to fight for.
Yeah.
Because when he's standing before Pilate, he tells him, my kingdom is not of this world. if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight.
Fight, yeah.
So, some fights,
Are worth having, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sorry, but I've gone over about 4 minutes. I don't care, but the kids back there probably care.